So as we continue our history lesson, looking at the context in which our story is set, the political intrigue in which our hero is stepping onto the scene, we learn that just as John the Baptist begins his role and steps into this hero's role, we learn of some other characters, and we've learned of Pontius Pilate being the ruler of Judea. We've learned of Herod Antipas and Philip the Tetrarch, who are ruling over their regions, Herod's children ruling over these regions. We also learn that there's a Jewish political angle to this as well, in that we're told of two high priests, Annas and Caiaphas. Now, there could only be one, to quote Highlander, there can be only one. And so Annas is high priest. What does that mean? Well, first of all, if we go back into the Old Testament, we see that Aaron, the brother of Moses, in Leviticus 8 and 9, he's appointed as the first high priest. He's there to represent the people before God, to stand in the gap, to intercede, in a temple, to make atonement for people, and to be that intercessor. And that family line, the high priesthood, is passed down the family line for 1100 years after Aaron, until we get to somebody, Ananias III. And Ananias III is deposed by the Romans, who are ruling that region, in about 175 BC, and then is murdered in 170 BC, 5 years later. And it's at that point that the high priesthood changes from being something which appears to be passed down Aaron's line to becoming something of a political appointment by the Roman governors. And usually high priests would only be appointed for 1 year. And what we have to understand is that these political appointments by the Romans as the high priests, they were something of a job for the mates, they were a job for the boys, and usually settled by some sort of bribe and some sort of corruption. So they're moving away from this role that they should have to something which is a little bit more corrupt. And Annas was appointed by Quirinius in AD 6 to be the high priest, the same Quirinius we read of when Jesus is being born in Luke 2 verse 2. And he is appointed as high priest, but he's deposed by the governor Valerius Gratius in AD 15. And far from sort of disappearing off the scene at this point, he's clearly an influential man, because he is carrying on this sense of the high priesthood. He's carrying on in the background. He's influencing, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And the high priests that follow, they are all part of his family. So this high priest, he's described by, I think it's Josephus, as being very fortunate to have 5 sons. And the next two high priests were his sons. And they were replaced in about AD 18 by Caiaphas, who becomes high priest from AD 18 to 36, the time of our setting of our hero story. And Caiaphas is Annas's son-in-law. Annas remains in the background for all this period of time, and he's putting the strings in the background, which is why we read that Annas is the high priest. He's not really the high priest, but actually he's behind the scenes acting and pulling all the strings. So to all intents and purposes, he's fulfilling the role of high priest. It's just that he doesn't have the title because the Romans have appointed his son-in-law. So you have this man who's a powerful influence in the background, who is a major schemer, who's good at bribery, democracy, with a political angle. He's from the Sadducees aristocracy, and the Sadducees were well known for being an ambitious, arrogant group of people, but very rich. Now, a couple of things just to maybe add some flavour and some context to our story. He had gained his wealth from what was known as the 4 booths of Annas, and it's recorded and documented that actually he had these 4 booths that were in effect market stalls. Now, where do you think those market stalls were? They were on the Mount of Olives and in the temple courts. in the court of the Gentiles. And those market stalls had a monopoly on the sale of sacrificial animals and the exchange of money. So, do you remember the account in the New Testament that when Jesus goes to the temple and he overturns the money tables, he's actually overturning Annas' business. He's confronting Annas' business because up to this point, Annas is known as charging exorbitant prices, exploiting the poor. And Jesus' actions, so you can read of it in Mark 11, verse 17, he calls it a den of robbers. And he's directly hurting and challenging Annas the high priest, who's getting rich off of these 4 booths that he has. And so, having challenged Annas' power and wealth, maybe we understand something of why there was this plot to kill Jesus, because Jesus was directly challenging Annas the high priest and all of his power. And when Jesus is arrested, the first person he's taken to see, and you can read this in John 18 verse 12, he's taken to see Annas. So even though Annas isn't the high priest, the first person he's taken to is Annas. And Annas questions Jesus before sending him to Caiaphas, his son-in-law. In other words, who's really the power behind the throne? Who's the one pulling the strings in the background? Also, it's probably worth noting that if you roll forward to the new church that's being birthed in Acts 4, Peter and John, when they're arrested for preaching the good news, who are they taken to see? Annas. And Annas clearly is this man of influence who for many years, even though not officially in post, he is dominating the governing Sanhedrin, he's dominating politics, he's dominating this rule, and is implicitly responsible for the arrest of Jesus. He's the power behind the throne. And when John and Jesus step up and begin to challenge the culture, they're actually directly challenging Annas' power base, and maybe explains why there was such enmity and opposition to what was going on.